The idea of a vaccine passport is un-American. It's likely unconstitutional.
An unprecedented, undemocratic power grab.
This is literally the end of human liberty in the West.
It really is, I think, an unprecedented threat to our freedom.
That is the new battle cry from the right. Vaccine passports are basically Nazism or Satanism or some other very terrible ism. Rick Grinnell posted a picture of a fictional Nazi to suggest the government wants to round up the unvaccinated. Madison Cawthorn said proposals like these smack of 1940s Nazi Germany. Marjorie Taylor Greene called vaccine passports Biden's mark of the beast. Justin Amash, who is generally pretty reasonable, characterized them as dystopian. Tucker Carlson, who's anything but reasonable, called them Orwellian. Seriously? What on earth is this Orwellian, Nazi, Satanist proposal that has them so afraid? Well, a so-called vaccine passport, which would allow Americans to prove they've been vaccinated against the coronavirus as businesses try to reopen, and would be free and available through applications for smartphones, which could display a scannable code similar to an airline boarding pass. People without smartphones could print them out. The idea is to help businesses get people back into bars and concerts and restaurants, to move back towards normalcy. A lot of countries are also working on something like this. Israel, the Republican Party's seemingly favorite foreign country, has already done it. Now, getting something like this done in the US is a challenge, and there are some legitimate privacy and equity concerns here, just as there are in many things we already do every single day. But the right would have you believe that a vaccine passport is effectively Big Brother coming for you and your family. And it just isn't. We already require people to prove they've been vaccinated for things like yellow fever to travel to certain countries. Indeed, there's even a passport you can carry to prove your vaccinations. And it's not just travel. As America's more than 63 million parents with kids under 18 know, all 50 states, with some exemptions, require proof that kids have been vaccinated to go to school. Here's the immunizations required for kindergarten and 6th grade entry in South Dakota, which includes vaccinations for measles, polio, tetanus, and a whole lot more. Even that state's far-right governor, Kristi Noem, realizes how important this is. After state lawmakers tried to pass a bill that would prevent schools and colleges from requiring vaccinations, Noem opposed it, saying she couldn't support the bill in good conscience because vaccinations save lives. And yet Noem is now very offended by the idea of proving you've been vaccinated for COVID, calling a vaccine passport one of the most un-American ideas in our nation's history, and saying we should oppose this oppression. Yeah, it's pure bad faith opportunism from someone who's clearly and cynically positioning herself for a potential 2024 GOP presidential run. The same kind of opportunism we're seeing from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's vowed to ban quote-unquote vaccine passports in his state. This is what the Republican Party is now. It's not a party of ideas or reasonable debate. It exists to play up fears and push ideas of right-wing victimhood. It's the only thing they're really good at these days. Take, for instance, that new Georgia voting law, which will hit black people disproportionately hard. In a recent piece in the Washington Post, columnist Paul Waldman argues that what just happened in Georgia was a double victory for the GOP. Republicans got their law passed, and they also got the opportunity to renew the sense of racial victimization they have so carefully cultivated among their constituents for years. And Washington Post columnist Paul Waldman joins me now to talk about all this. Paul, thanks so much for coming on. Is the Republican Party now basically just all culture wars all the time?
Well, that is really where a lot of the key figures in the party see that they can, tap into the anger, the sense of kind of dislocation that they think is going to be to their political advantage. And it really is kind of remarkable that in many ways they've sort of seeded the playing field on policy issues. It's not that there aren't plenty of conservatives at think tanks and who have, plans to reform welfare or to decrease taxes. Those things are there, but they're really kind of pushed to the side within the party. The people who really are driving the party forward, they're not, arguing that much about what their next tax plan should look like. It's more about how can I kind of tap into all that anger, and how can I do it through things like telling them that they're sort of oppressed because of their race, and that liberals are coming after them, that cancel culture is coming for them, that the specter of a transgender girl playing on her middle school softball team is going to be the end of life as they know it. And so it's something like these vaccine passports, which I should say are not it's something that the government is going to be issuing to you, that really kind of taps into a lot of those fears of oppression that they've spent so much time cultivating.
And some of the fears from the leaders is totally cynical. As I mentioned, Kristi Noem was fine with vaccination certificates for schools in South Dakota last year. Suddenly they're the most oppressive thing in modern American history. You mentioned race, and race is where almost all our conversations come back to. This was Lindsey Graham's response to the Georgia voting bill. Have a listen.
They had the highest turnout in the history of Georgia. We had 150-something million people vote. So every time a Republican does anything, we're a racist. If you're a white conservative, you're a racist. If you're a black Republican, you're either a prop or Uncle Tom. They use the racism card to advance a liberal agenda, and we're tired of it.
They're tired of it, Paul. They're the real victims. In your piece, you cite a poll from the Public Religion Research Institute, which found that although 52% of Republicans did say black people face discrimination, 57% said white people face discrimination, which for me kind of sums it up, really, sums it all up.
Yeah, and if you're not kind of tuned into the Republican media universe, you may not be aware of this, but one of the central themes on Fox News, on conservative talk radio, is that first of all, there are malevolent forces of racial reckoning that are coming for you. In its latest iteration, it's Black Lives Matter. But also that the only kind of real racism that exists anymore is white people being unfairly accused of being racist. This is a constant theme that anytime you enter a discussion that even gets remotely around race, that liberals are going to accuse you of being a racist, and it's an unanswerable charge. This is something that conservatives talk about all the time, and they very, very firmly believe it. And it's not that there aren't sometimes excesses where some liberal really does, issue an unfair accusation of racism. But conservatives feel like this is something that they are constantly being accused of. And I think politicians like Lindsey Graham really use that to kind of activate white identity, to say that like this is sort of this at the center of the political conflict in America is liberals who are going to kind of come after you because you're white. We saw that when Barack Obama was president, and every single policy thing that he did was described as reparations, that they were going to be grabbing from your pocket to give it to unworthy black people.
But Paul,
and we saw it last summer, where, if you watched Fox News or listened to conservative talk radio, you would have thought that half of American cities had burned to the ground because this murderous Black Lives Matter.
Let me just jump in before we
massacred people left and right.
Paul, I'm just going to jump in. I completely get what you're saying, but you do make the argument that this is good for Republicans. It's a strategic move by them. I just want to push back a little bit and say Mitch McConnell looked very defensive and unsure of himself when he was trying to push back against the filibuster being a tool of Jim Crow. Calling the filibuster racist hasn't really helped the Republicans. Have a listen.
Yeah, actually, historians do not agree. It has no racial history at all. None. So there's no dispute among historians about that.
So I get what you're saying, and they're definitely using it for their own self-interest, but it does hurt them too. I thought McConnell looked very defensive on the whole filibuster racism issue.
Yeah, it's a tricky line they want to walk, because on the one hand, they really need to sort of activate white identity to keep people in their base agitated and worked up. And on the other hand, they want to kind of tell a story of their own racial innocence. They're always saying how this is the party of Abraham Lincoln, even though, of course, back then, Republicans were the liberal party. But this is sort of what the kind of two-step is. And on the one hand, they want to insist that we're not racist and nothing we do is motivated by race. But on the other hand, they want to do things like pass all these voter suppression laws and then tell their voters when it comes time for the elections that liberals and the black people that they serve are coming for you, and that's why you have to get out and vote Republican.